Some stories are just so bizarre, so completely unbelievable. They sound like they've been ripped straight out of a horror movie. We've all heard about finding a fly in your soup, or maybe something worse. But what happens when you're leaning in for that first perfect sip of a margarita, and something drops from the ceiling, brushes your skin, and splashes right into your glass? And what if that something is alive, wiggling, and staring back at you? This isn't a hypothetical. This is the true story of what happened to one woman. An experience so shocking it would change how she felt about eating out forever. Just picture it, the cheerful vibe of a local Mexican restaurant, glasses clinking, people chatting. It's the picture of a normal weeknight out. But for Carletta Andrews, that normal evening was about to be shattered by an encounter that's almost impossible to explain and has left her with a trauma she can't shake. It's a story that starts with a simple dinner and ends with a slithering creature in her cocktail. A story that will make you look up the next time you sit down for a drink. You're out for a quiet dinner, just looking to relax. You order your favorite drink, and as it arrives, you can almost taste it already. You lean in, ready for that first sip, when you feel a light tap on your forehead. It's so faint you almost ignore it. But you barely have time to register the feeling before your eyes catch something moving in your glass. It's not an olive. It's not a stray piece of lime. It's a snake. A live baby snake wrapping itself around the straw of your margarita. This isn't just a shocking story. It's a moment of pure, absolute terror that one woman lived through, a moment that turned a simple pleasure into a source of deep-seated fear. It was Wednesday, April 16th, 2025, a totally normal day for Carletta Andrews and her husband. Like so many of us do when we need a break from the routine, they decided to go out for dinner. Their spot was the Patron Mexican restaurant and cantina in Sandston, Virginia, a local place in Henrico County. It was one of those comfortable, familiar spots where you know you're going to get good food and a relaxing night. For Carletta, the evening was going exactly as planned. She'd finished her meal and was ready for the best part, a freshly made margarita. The restaurant was probably humming with the usual weeknight sounds, the murmur of conversations, the sizzle from the kitchen, the clatter of forks on plates. It was a normal shared space where people came to unwind. Carletta was just another customer about to enjoy a drink she'd had plenty of times before. There was absolutely no reason to think this night, or this particular drink, would be any different. It's funny how, right before something shocking happens, life seems almost painfully ordinary. Those mundane details get burned into your memory because of the trauma that comes next. You can just imagine Carletta settling back in her chair, maybe chatting with her husband, letting the day's stress melt away. The margarita, when it showed up, would have looked perfect. The salted rim, the pale green drink, the straw sitting there invitingly. It was a little symbol of relaxation. She had no idea that the ceiling above her was hiding a tiny living secret that was about to make a terrifying entrance. The restaurant itself, the Patron, was a well-known place in the community. And like any restaurant, it's expected to be clean, safe, and up to code. It was a business, a place for people to gather, and on that April evening, it became the stage for something so unbelievable it would end up making headlines. But for Carletta, it was just a restaurant. A place she chose to spend her time and money. A place where she felt perfectly safe. We take for granted the sense of security we feel in public, especially in a familiar spot like a local restaurant. We trust that the environment is safe, and that the biggest surprise we'll face is a new special on the menu. Carletta, like everyone else there, was operating on that basic trust. She ordered a margarita, not a side of primal fear. As she got ready for that first sip, everything was exactly as it should be. The last few hours had been completely unremarkable. And it's that very ordinariness that makes what happened next so incredibly jarring. The scene was set, not for the quiet end to a nice meal, but for a moment of raw, unscripted horror. The calm before the storm is a cliché, But in this case, it was real, a peaceful little bubble that was just seconds away from being violently burst. It all happened in a split second. Carletta leaned forward, her eyes on the margarita, the straw just inches from her lips. In that moment, she felt something hit her forehead. It wasn't hard, just a light tap, but it was enough to make her pull back, confused. She turned to her husband and asked, "What was that?" It's the kind of question you ask on pure reflex when your brain tries to make sense of something that doesn't fit. You don't expect things to fall on your head in the middle of a restaurant. Her husband had no idea. The thing hadn't come from behind her or beside her. It was in front of her. When Carletta looked back at her drink, her entire world just tilted. The strange feeling on her forehead was suddenly, horribly explained. There, in her margarita glass, was a snake. Not a plastic toy from a prank, not some weird garnish, but a living, breathing reptile. It was one of those moments where your brain just can't catch up with what your eyes are seeing. A snake in her drink. It feels like something you'd hallucinate, but this was real. The creature was moving. She watched, completely frozen, as the baby snake started to wrap its slithery little body around her straw. That specific chilling detail is what turns a shock into a real trauma. It wasn't just that a snake fell in her drink. It was interacting with it, making it its own, turning something she was about to enjoy into an object of pure disgust. The rest, as Carletta later said, was a blur. The mind has a way of protecting itself, of smudging the edges of memories that are too sharp. Her first instinct was just to get away. She jumped back from the bar, propelled by a jolt of pure terror. The calm restaurant atmosphere was shattered, not by a loud noise, but by a quiet, slithering little horror that was now the center of her universe. Panic spreads. As Carletta was living her own private nightmare, the people around her started to react. The restaurant staff was suddenly dealing with something way outside of their job description. Their first attempt to fix it was almost comical. Someone grabbed a stick and tried to get the snake to wrap around it, which, of course, didn't work. How exactly do you write a training manual for a snake in a margarita? Thankfully, the chaos was cut short by another diner. A man sitting on the other side of the bar saw what was happening and decided to handle it himself. He walked over, reached right into the glass, and grabbed the snake. Then he took it outside and let it go. It was quick and decisive, and it ended the immediate problem. But for Carletta, just because the snake was gone didn't mean the horror was over. The image was burned into her mind, and the phantom feeling of it hitting her forehead was going to stick around for a long time. In the middle of all that chaos, Carletta's mind fixated on one specific revealing fear. "I kept saying, 'Please don't let it go in my purse,'" she recalled. That says so much about how fear works. Even when you're completely terrified, your brain looks for something concrete to worry about. A purse is your personal space, full of your everyday life. The thought of that snake getting in there, of her literally taking the horror home with her, was just too much to bear. It was a plea to just contain the nightmare, to keep it in that now contaminated margarita glass. But some things, once they happen, can't be contained. So the snake was gone. Crisis over, right? Not even close. The terror it left behind was a living, breathing thing. For Carletta Andrews, the nightmare was really just beginning. She was left shaking, completely overcome with shock. The restaurant staff, probably just as stunned as she was, made an offer that would sound reasonable in any other situation. They offered to move her and her husband to a booth, away from the bar. But for Carletta, the entire restaurant was now a contaminated zone. The air itself felt thick with what had just happened. The idea of sitting back down and trying to pretend things were normal was impossible. Her answer was simple. She just wanted out of there. She needed to escape the place where her sense of safety had been so completely violated. The restaurant's offer of a free meal was meaningless. Who cares about a free dinner when you've just been served a glass of terror? She left the restaurant in a state of shock. "I left shaking. I was traumatized," she later said. It was a simple statement, but it perfectly captured her state of mind. This wasn't just a scare that would fade in a few minutes. This was the beginning of a real trauma. A week later, she said the shock was still rolling in, like a tide of anxiety that just wouldn't go out. She was, in her own words, still rattled. The trauma showed up in all sorts of ways. First, and most obviously, was her relationship with the restaurant. When asked if she'd ever go back, her answer was a hard, completely understandable no. The place was now forever tied to the most terrifying moment of her life, but the fear was sneakier than that. It started to creep into the simple act of dining out, something she used to enjoy. As she wrote on social media, she was not going out to eat anytime soon. The trust she'd lost wasn't just with the patron. It was with the whole idea of being a relaxed customer anywhere. And then there was the margarita. A drink that's supposed to be about fun and relaxation was now a symbol of her trauma. It's hard to imagine ever looking at one the same way again. That image of the snake wrapped around the straw is so powerful and gross, it could ruin the drink for you forever. Trying to process it all, Carletta did what most of us would do. She posted about it on Facebook. She shared the photo of the snake in her glass, the undeniable shocking proof. The post went viral almost instantly. Comments poured in, a digital tidal wave of horror and sympathy. People were floored. One comment summed it all up perfectly: the way my soul would have left my body. Another person wrote, "Girl, they would have been taking me to the king." These comments, while validating, also pointed out something Carletta had realized herself. A lot of people were surprised by how calm she seemed in the moment. "A lot of people are surprised I handled it as good as I did," she said, before admitting, "because you know it could have went left." She knew how close she had been to completely losing it, but the fear wasn't just about what happened. It was about what could have happened. A deeply disturbing thought started to bother her, a question that hinted at a much bigger problem. The snake in her glass was a baby, and that led her to a terrifyingly logical conclusion. If that was the baby, I fear, is the mom there? It's a question that turns a single freak accident into a possible infestation. The fear was no longer about the one snake she saw, but about the ones she couldn't. And this wasn't just a passing thought. It was a real, ongoing source of fear. The restaurant owner, when asked, suggested the snake probably got in through an AC unit. But when he was asked what they were doing to make sure it didn't happen again, his reported answer was a single chilling word: nothing. For Carletta, and for everyone following her story, that might have been the most disturbing part of all. The horror of the event was made worse by the fact that they apparently weren't going to do anything to stop it from happening again. The incident also dragged up some of the restaurant's past issues. Prompted by the viral story, news outlets found Virginia Department of Health records from an inspection a few months earlier. In December 2024, the restaurant had been cited for things like mold, broken handles, and most importantly, a missing ceiling tile in the dish room. While the records showed the violations were fixed, it added a troubling backstory. That missing ceiling tile sounded a lot like a perfect doorway for an unwanted guest from above. It painted a picture of a place where maintenance wasn't exactly a top priority and made you wonder if this whole nightmare could have and should have been avoided. Carletta's story is a wild reminder that absolutely anything can happen at any moment. We've all had those experiences, big or small, that have left us feeling a little shaken. What are some of the most bizarre or unsettling things you've ever witnessed? Share your stories and what you think about Carletta's experience in the comments below. And if you find stories like this compelling and want to keep exploring the strange and unbelievable things that happen in our world, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. In the end, the story of Carletta Andrews and the snake in her margarita is so much more than just a freaky anecdote. It's about how fragile our sense of safety really is. A normal night out turned into a life-changing event in a single terrifying second. The incident at the Patron on April 16, 2025, went viral not just because it's shocking, but because it hits a nerve. It taps into a primal fear we all have, the fear of something wild and uncontrollable invading our safe, civilized spaces. Carletta's reaction, the shock, the panic, the lingering anxiety, is a textbook example of trauma. For her, the days and weeks after weren't about getting back to normal. They were about dealing with a constant rolling wave of fear. It wasn't just a bad night. It was an event that left a permanent scar. The public's reaction on social media, that massive wave of shared horror, just shows how universal that fear is. People weren't just laughing at a weird story. They were recognizing the shared vulnerability, the unsettling truth that any of us could find ourselves in a situation that's just too much to handle. The details of the aftermath tell the real story of her trauma. Her refusal to ever go back to the restaurant, her new fear of eating out, and that haunting question, is the mom there? Are all symptoms of a sense of safety that has been shattered. The restaurant's reported response of nothing only made things worse, turning a freak accident into what feels like a potential ongoing threat. Carletta's story started with a simple craving for a margarita and ended with a trauma that will likely follow her long after the glass was cleared away. The snake may have been tiny, but it cast an immense shadow, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that are actually true.